A brilliant young philosopher who once told her own mother she no longer believed in God would spend her final years praying the Psalms as a Catholic nun, before dying in a Nazi gas chamber. The Church remembers today, August 9, Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, known to the world as Edith Stein, virgin and martyr, on the anniversary of her death in 1942. Born in 1891 in Breslau into a devout Jewish family, Edith was the youngest of 11 children and lost her father while still a small girl. Raised by her widowed mother Auguste, she drifted from the faith of her childhood as a teenager, yet always respected her mother's own devotion. A gifted student of history, psychology, and philosophy, Edith became a disciple of Edmund Husserl at Göttingen and, after serving as a volunteer nurse during the First World War, completed a doctoral thesis on empathy. Her search for truth, step by step, opened onto Christ. Reading the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila in a single night in the summer of 1921 changed everything. She was baptized the following January. Nazi racial laws ended her academic career in 1933, and that same year she entered the Carmel of Cologne, taking the name Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. Moved to the Netherlands for safety, she was arrested with her sister Rosa in 1942 in retaliation for the Dutch bishop's condemnation of the deportations, deported through Westerbork, and died at Auschwitz on August 9 of that year. She is co-patroness of Europe, and her life teaches that an honest search for truth, followed all the way to the end, always leads to God. On this same day, an ocean away and decades earlier, a hospital administrator many considered too competent to spare would give up a comfortable career to care for patients no one else wanted to touch. This is Saint Marianne Cope, Franciscan sister and missionary to those suffering from Hansen's disease, also remembered today, August 9, the date of her death in 1918. Born in 1838 in Germany, Marianne emigrated as a child to Utica, New York, and left school young to support her family after her father fell ill. She entered the Sisters of St. Francis of Syracuse in 1862, and quickly showed real gifts as an administrator, helping open hospitals that accepted patients other institutions turned away. In 1883, after 50 other religious congregations had already declined the same request, Marianne answered a bishop's appeal for sisters willing to serve patients isolated by Hansen's disease in Hawaii. She set sail with 6 companions, reorganized hospitals, and in 1888 moved permanently to the isolated peninsula of Molokai. There she assisted Saint Damien de Veuster through his final months and, after his death, continued his work with the boys as well as her own home for women and girls. Without ever contracting the disease herself, she gave the sick back cleanliness, education, music, and above all their dignity, dying peacefully on Molokai in 1918. Her sisters remembered her motto simply as, "For God alone." Marianne is venerated as a model for every healthcare worker, and her life teaches that true competence, placed at the service of the forgotten, becomes a concrete form of mercy. Centuries of devotion later found their echo in Spain, where a young woman with no schooling, standing, or resources of her own would found a religious congregation from nothing but conviction. This is Saint Candida Maria de Jesus, foundress of the Daughters of Jesus, also celebrated today, August 9, the date of her death in 1912. Born Juana Josefa in 1845 into a humble weaver's family in the Basque Country, she saw her education cut short by poverty and went into domestic service as a girl. Even as a young woman, she turned down proposals of marriage, sensing a call to consecrate herself entirely to God. "For God alone," she once answered. In 1869, while praying before the altar of the Holy Family in Valladolid, she understood her mission, the Christian education of children and the advancement of women. With the guidance of a Jesuit priest, she arrived in Salamanca and, in 1871, founded the Daughters of Jesus, taking the name Candida Maria de Jesus. Her schools deliberately brought together girls from different social backgrounds, a bold choice for its era, and the congregation soon spread across Spain and to Brazil, receiving pontifical approval in 1901. She died in Salamanca in 1912, leaving behind another saying the Holy See still preserves, "Where there is no room for the poor, there is no room for me either." Her life teaches that trust in God can outweigh every lack of human means or standing. In a very different century and cause, an Austrian farmer with no formal training in theology would refuse to fire a single shot for Hitler, even knowing it would cost him his life. This is Blessed Franz Jägerstätter, husband, father, and martyr of Christian conscience, also remembered today, August 9, the date of his execution in 1943. Born in 1907 in the Austrian village of St. Radegund, Franz drifted from religious practice as a young man before his marriage to Franziska Schwaninger in 1936 deepened his faith completely. The couple raised 3 daughters, prayed together as a family, and Franz took on the humble role of parish sacristan. As Nazi ideology tightened its grip on Austria, he recognized early that it could never be reconciled with the gospel. Called up for military duty, he underwent training in 1940 and 1941, but reached a settled decision: he would not fight in Hitler's war. In March 1943, he reported to the barracks and refused armed service, offering unarmed medical work instead. The offer was rejected. Imprisoned in Berlin, he was sentenced to death for undermining military morale. Neither the pressure of interrogators nor the thought of the wife and daughters he would leave behind moved him to act against his conscience. On August 9, 1943, he was executed by guillotine at Brandenburg and der Havel. In a note written after his sentencing, he left these words: "I cannot renounce my belief, even if it costs me my life." Franz's life teaches that an ordinary layman's conscience, formed quietly in daily prayer, can stand firm against an entire regime. On the other side of Europe, just a few years earlier, a newly appointed bishop would choose to stay with a flock he had led for only a matter of months, even as war closed in around him. This is Blessed Florentino Ascencio Barroso, bishop and martyr, also celebrated today, August 9, the date of his death in 1936. Born in 1877 in the Spanish province of Valladolid to a family of farm laborers, Florentino was ordained a priest in 1901 and spent decades in formation and pastoral roles, earning a reputation as sober and always available. In November 1935, Pope Pius XI named him apostolic administrator of Barbastro. He received episcopal ordination in January 1936, just months before Spain's civil war broke out. Warned of the mounting danger, Florentino chose not to abandon the diocese he had just received. Militiamen occupied the episcopal palace and arrested him in July 1936, subjecting him to interrogation and cruel treatment. In the early hours of August 9, he was taken to the Barbastro cemetery and shot. Asked beforehand whether he knew where he was going, he is remembered to have answered simply, "I am going to paradise." The Church recognized that he was killed out of hatred for the faith and for his episcopal ministry. His remains are now venerated in the Cathedral of Barbastro, and his life teaches that a true pastor stays with his people, forgiving even to the very end, no matter the cost. That same summer, in a country not their own, 7 young religious brothers who had devoted their lives to nursing the sick would be arrested for nothing more than the habit they wore. These are Blessed Ruben de Jesus López Aguilar and his 6 companions, Arturo, Juan Bautista, Eugenio, Esteban, Melquiades, and Gaspar, Hospitaller martyrs of St. John of God, also remembered today, August 9, the date of their deaths in 1936. Ruben was born in 1908 in Concepcion, Colombia. His 6 companions came from different Colombian towns and rural Catholic families, most of them still in their 20s. Having already served in Colombian hospitals, they had been sent to Spain to deepen their religious and professional formation, some preparing even for the priesthood. By 1936, they belonged to a hospitaller community near Madrid, and when Spain's civil war erupted, their religious identity itself became a danger. While their order tried to arrange their safe return to Colombia, the 7 set out instead for Barcelona, where they were detained simply for being religious and shot together on August 9, 1936. Testimonies gathered for their cause hold that they faced death praying and forgiving one another. Beatified together in 1992, they became the very first Colombians ever raised to the honors of the altar. Their shared life teaches that true hospitality is a total gift of self, one that young men can carry faithfully even into a war that was never their own. Long before that war, in an England transformed overnight by a king's ambition, a Carthusian monk accustomed to a life of silence would let that same silence cost him his life rather than speak a lie. This is Blessed Richard Bear, Carthusian priest and martyr, also remembered today, August 9, the date of his death in 1537. Born in Glastonbury around 1508, Richard entered the London Charterhouse in 1523, embracing a community shaped by solitude, austerity, and common prayer. When Henry VIII 1534 Act of Supremacy demanded that every subject recognize the king, not the pope, as head of the church in England, the Carthusians were among the first and firmest to resist. Several of their priors were already executed by 1535. In May 1537, Richard and 9 fellow monks refused to take the oath, faithful to the Roman pontiff and unwilling to accept the dissolution of a Christian marriage by royal will. Sent to Newgate prison, they were chained standing and deliberately starved. For a time, a woman raised in St. Thomas More's own household managed to smuggle them food in secret, but once that lifeline was cut, hunger wore the group down completely. Richard was never given a public execution, he simply died in prison on August 9, 1537. Leo XIII confirmed his cult among the English martyrs in 1886, and his life teaches that refusing to say with one's lips what conscience judges false is itself a quiet, unarmed form of courage. Centuries later, and on the opposite side of the same continent, a Benedictine monk exiled by revolution would spend his final days not fleeing death, but nursing the dying men chained beside him. This is Blessed Claude Richard, Benedictine priest and martyr, also remembered today, August 9, the date of his death in 1794. Born in 1741 in Lorraine, France, Claude entered the ancient abbey of Saint Hidolphe de Moyenmoutier and was later ordained a priest. When the French Revolution suppressed religious communities and demanded oaths that many priests, Claude included, found incompatible with communion with the Church, he was expelled from his monastery and arrested in November 1793. Sentenced to deportation, he was taken to the port of Rochefort in 1794. When the planned voyage to Guyana never sailed, hundreds of priests were instead crowded onto rotting prison ships anchored offshore, among them a former slave vessel. Heat, filth, hunger, and disease turned these hulks into a slow, prolonged place of death. Rather than withdraw into mere survival, Claude tended his sick companions until the same disease spreading among them struck him down, and he died aboard on August 9, 1794. The Church recognized his martyrdom not as a single execution, but as a death brought on by inhuman imprisonment tied directly to his priesthood, and by charity carried out to the point of exhaustion. Claude's life teaches that even chained and dying, a priest can still choose to serve rather than merely endure. Back once more in Spain, that same brutal summer, 2 elderly Piarist religious, one nearly blind, the other living with illness for over a decade, would be taken from the homes sheltering them and never return. These are Blessed Faustino Oteiza Segura and Blessed Florentino Felipe Naya, Piarist priest and lay brother, also remembered today, August 9, the date of their deaths in 1936. Faustino was born in 1890 in Navarre and, despite living with Parkinson's disease from 1920 onward, continued forming young novices as master until his final years. Florentino, born in 1856 in Huesca, had worked the land before entering the Piarists as a lay brother, spending decades quietly serving in the kitchens and refectories of their schools. When the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936 and their community was expelled, illness and old age at first kept both men sheltered in local homes. On August 9, men came for them under the pretext of taking testimony. According to the testimonies gathered for their cause, the two renewed their religious vows, said their farewells, and were driven away and shot near Azenay. Beatified together in 1995, they stand as models for educators and for those who quietly sustain a community's daily life. Their shared life teaches that forming the young and serving a common home in silence are both, in their own way, a complete offering to God. And we close today's journey, August 9, with a young priest whose entire ministry lasted barely 4 years before he was hunted down for the collar he wore. This is Blessed Guillermo Plaza Hernandez, diocesan priest and formator of seminarians, also remembered today, the date of his death in 1936. Born in 1908 in Toledo province into a family of deep Catholic roots, Guillermo was ordained in 1932 at just 24, and soon joined the Brotherhood of Diocesan Worker Priests, dedicated to forming future priests. He served as prefect of discipline in Zaragoza before returning to the major seminary in Toledo in 1935, remembered by his students as a priest wholly given to his vocation. When Spain's civil war broke out in July 1936 and seminaries were shut down, Guillermo went into hiding, moving from refuge to refuge. On the morning of August 9, he sought shelter in the village of Cabeza, but was discovered only hours later. Militiamen led him to the outskirts of Argesh, where he was shot that same day, at only 28 years old. The Church recognized that his death came from hatred of the priesthood itself, not as an accident of war. And with that story, we close today's 10 Saints and Blesseds. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day. Comment asking for one of their intercession for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear it today, because every share like that is a real act of evangelization. And remember, the complete prayer to each of them is right here in the video description.